Welcome to the Morning English Podcast. Listen, learn, and speak English daily.
Imagine this for a second. You wake up in the morning, and before you even physically open your eyes, you feel it.
Oh, yeah. That immediate dread.
Right. There is this distinct heaviness sitting right behind your forehead, and your body feels physically drained, like you've been running a marathon in your sleep.
Even though you supposedly just had, 8 hours of rest.
Exactly. And then the mental slide begins. You start to think about your day, the looming meetings, the unread emails sitting in your inbox like little ticking time bombs.
All the family responsibilities you have to juggle.
Yeah. Instantly, your chest tightens, your breathing gets a little shallower, and in the quiet of your bedroom, before your feet have even hit the floor, you realize you're completely overwhelmed. You say to yourself, I feel stressed.
It's a remarkably universal experience, isn't it?
Mm.
I mean, that morning cortisol spike is a biological reality for so many of us.
It really is.
It's the perfect illustration of what happens when our internal alarm system trips before we've even engaged with a single other human being.
Mm.
But the real friction, the core problem we're unpacking today, it doesn't actually happen in that isolated moment in bed.
Right, because you're alone then.
Exactly. The real challenge comes 20 minutes later when you step out of your bedroom, walk into the kitchen, or log on to your first video call.
Yeah, how do you communicate that internal state to the external world?
Right. What words do you actually use when your brain feels like a browser with 90 tabs open and half of them are playing audio, but you don't know which ones?
Oh man, that browser analogy is painfully accurate. I feel that in my bones. And navigating that exact friction is what makes today's source material so subversive, honestly.
It really is.
We're working off a document today titled How to Talk About Stress in Simple English. Now, if you're listening to this right now, you clearly already understand English. You're likely a native or a fully fluent speaker.
Right. You don't need a vocabulary lesson.
Exactly. But here is the massive, fundamental paradigm shift we discovered in these notes. While this material was ostensibly designed to help language learners grasp basic vocabulary, it accidentally serves as a masterclass in psychological de-escalation.
Yeah, accidentally brilliant.
So our mission today isn't about learning a language at all. It's about exploring how stripping our communication down to its absolute most foundational components, like simplifying our vocabulary and radically altering our pacing, is actually a biological and psychological tool.
It really is a tool.
Yeah, it de-escalates our own anxiety and forces clear, empathetic communication in a way that our complex adult vocabularies just completely fail to do.
Which is deeply counterintuitive for most professionals,
Oh, absolutely.
We're so conditioned to believe that sophisticated problems require sophisticated language.
Right, if you're managing a complex supply chain failure or something.
Exactly. Or dealing with a nuanced interpersonal conflict at work, your instinct is to use precise, elevated vocabulary to demonstrate that you understand the gravity of the situation.
You want to sound smart.
Right. But the source material pinpoints exactly where this instinct betrays us. It highlights that when things trigger us, whether it's work, family, health, finances, we typically react in one of two ways.
Fight or flight, essentially.
Sort of, but linguistically.
Yeah.
Either we shut down completely and don't know what to say, or we overcompensate.
Ah, the overcompensation.
Yeah, we say too much, too fast, and ultimately the core message gets completely lost in the noise.
You know, I read that observation in the notes and immediately felt a little defensive.
Huh, really?
Because that's exactly what I do. When I'm under pressure, I turn into a defense attorney giving a closing argument.
I think a lot of us do that.
Right. I don't just say I'm having a bad day. I provide this, itemized chronological list of every single thing that went wrong, heavily layered with context and justification.
The massive data dump.
Yes. But honestly, it's like a pilot in a cockpit whose engines have just failed. And instead of just calling Mayday and stating the problem, they get on the radio and start reading the entire technical manual for the turbine allowed to air traffic control.
And how is air traffic control supposed to help in that scenario?
They can't.
They can't.
Yeah.
They're completely overwhelmed by the data, but your defense attorney reaction, it's completely normal. It's a defense mechanism.
We just want to prove we're competent, right?
Exactly. We use a barrage of words as a shield to prove we're competent, even when we're falling apart. But the solution presented here is to completely abandon that strategy.
Just drop it entirely.
Yep. It offers a foundational baseline. The material insists that the most effective starting point is simply stating, I feel stressed, or I am stressed.
2 or 3 words.
2 or 3 words. A declarative sentence. Full stop.
I mean, I get the appeal of simplicity, I really do. But I'm going to push back on this a little bit because it feels a bit regressive. Well, think about being in a high-stakes environment, say a board meeting or an intense negotiation with a contractor. If things are going off the rails and someone asks for an update, just sitting back and saying, I feel stressed, feels almost uncomfortably vulnerable.
It does feel vulnerable.
It feels like a lack of vocabulary. We spend our whole educational lives learning how to be articulate and precise. Doesn't reverting to a 3-word sentence run the risk of making us look incapable of handling the complexity of the situation?
I completely see where you're coming from. It
Yeah.
absolutely feels vulnerable. But we really have to separate social conditioning from cognitive reality here.
Okay, lay it on me.
Your pushback assumes that an articulate, highly verbal brain and a deeply stressed brain are the same organ.
Oh, and they aren't.
They aren't, not functionally. When you're experiencing acute stress, your prefrontal cortex, which is the region responsible for executive function, logic, and assembling complex, nuanced language, it literally starts to lose blood flow and operational dominance.
Wow, really?
Yes, your amygdala and limbic system, which are the emotional survival centers, they take the wheel. So if you try to force complex multi-clause sentences while your limbic system is firing, you are dramatically increasing your own cognitive load.
Because the language center is basically offline.
Exactly. You're asking a system that is currently optimizing for survival to perform high-level linguistic gymnastics.
So it's not that you're choosing to be less articulate, it's that you literally don't have the neurological bandwidth in that moment to process the vocabulary without, burning out your mental CPU.
Exactly. It's a systems failure caused by a lack of available resources. By falling back on a fundamental declarative sentence like, I am stressed, you are bypassing that cognitive bottleneck completely.
You're keeping it simple for your own brain.
Yes. You don't have to search your mental hard drive for words like incapacitated, overburdened, or experiencing acute operational friction. You just use the primary tool. It functions as an anchor.
An anchor, I like that.
It immediately grounds you in reality without requiring intense processing power.
I really like that concept of an anchor, because think about how often you see someone actively panicking and they're spinning their wheels trying to sound put together.
Oh, we've all seen it.
Right. They'll say something like, well, we're currently experiencing some bandwidth constraints regarding the cross-functional deliverables, which is causing a temporary bottleneck.
Meanwhile, they're sweating profusely.
Yes. They're sweating, their voice is shaking, and everyone in the room knows they're absolutely terrified. The jargon isn't hiding the stress, it's highlighting the panic.
It makes it so obvious.
This framework challenges us to just admit the baseline truth first, drop the anchor, let your brain catch its breath.
And crucially, it provides a stable starting point for the listener too.
How so?
When you strip away the corporate jargon or the emotional spiraling, the person you're speaking to doesn't have to decode your message. They know exactly where you stand. The material drills this in, treating these short phrases not just as options, but as essential foundational blocks.
So you have to start there.
Right. It's about building muscle memory so that when the cognitive overload hits, you don't freeze, you just deploy the baseline.
Okay, let's play this out realistically, though. You drop the anchor, you say, I am stressed. But conversations rarely stop there.
True.
I mean, you can't just walk down the hallway at work, look your manager in the eye, say I am stressed, and then just stare at them in silence.
That would be pretty awkward.
Right. You have to explain why. So how do we bridge the gap between that 3-word baseline and the actual context of the problem without immediately falling back into that trap of word vomit and over-explaining?
That's where the concept of calibration comes into play.
Calibration.
Yeah, you don't jump from the anchor straight into a 5-minute monologue. You build step by step. The source material advocates for adding very simple modifiers first.
Like what?
Instead of just, I feel stressed, you introduce scale.
Yeah.
You say, I feel a little stressed, or I feel very stressed, or even just adding a time frame like, I feel stressed today.
Oh, I see. It's essentially a volume knob.
Exactly.
You aren't changing the radio station. The station is still, I am overwhelmed. You're just adjusting the volume for the listener so they know whether this is a minor annoyance or a 5-alarm fire.
Precisely. It scales the urgency without adding cognitive complexity. And then, when it is time to add the actual reason for the stress, the structure is incredibly disciplined.
It doesn't let you ramble.
No, it doesn't use conjunctions to weave a massive narrative. It uses separate, distinct sentences. The example provided is brilliant in its brevity. It just says, I have a lot of work. I feel stressed.
I want to pause right there because the punctuation of that example is the whole secret. I have a lot of work.
I feel stressed.
Yep.
Full stops.
Notice what isn't there. There's no because. There's no there. Therefore, it doesn't say I have a lot of work and it's completely unfair and it's making me stressed.
No victim narrative.
Right. It takes the objective reality, the amount of work, and completely isolates it from the subjective emotional experience.
Which is a technique closely mirrored in acceptance and commitment therapy. It's known as cognitive diffusion.
Cognitive diffusion. That sounds intense.
It's actually very simple in practice. When we link our circumstances to our emotions in one long, tangled sentence, we fuse the event with the pain. We make the workload the enemy.
Oh, I see.
But by separating them, fact, full stop, emotion, full stop,
Yeah.
you neutralize the narrative. You are simply reporting two independent realities to your listener.
Which completely changes the tone of the conversation.
It really does.
There's an insight in our notes that perfectly encapsulates this. It states that communicating this way means you are not too negative, you are just sharing your feelings.
Such a great quote.
Because when we use long, rambling sentences to explain our stress, we usually sound like we're complaining. We sound like victims.
All right, the woe is me tone.
But when you state a fact, pause, and then state your internal state, it sounds incredibly mature. It's honest, it sets a boundary, but it remains entirely professional and calm.
It removes the implicit accusation. If you tell someone you gave me too much work and I'm stressed, they will instantly become defensive.
Oh, 100%.
But if you say, I have a lot of work, I feel stressed, you're presenting a situation that you both can look at objectively. It transforms the listener from a potential adversary or a trapped therapist into a collaborative partner.
Okay, let's apply this to a specific everyday scenario.
Sure.
You're at the office or maybe a family gathering, and you're clearly looking a bit frazzled. Someone walks by and does the polite, casual check-in. They ask, are you okay?
Ah, the classic check-in trap.
Exactly. If you're actually stressed, this is a total trap, right? If you say, yes, I'm fine, you're lying and swallowing your anxiety.
Which just makes it worse.
Right. But if you say, no, I'm incredibly stressed out about my mortgage and my kids and my health, you've just ruined the casual interaction and trapped someone by the coffee machine.
You've made it weird.
Yeah. So the notes offer a fascinating middle ground for this. The phrase is, I am okay, but I feel stressed.
It's a masterclass in social navigation. Let's break down why that specific phrasing works so well. The first clause, I am okay, fulfills the social contract.
Because they don't actually want a medical emergency.
Right. When people casually ask if you're okay, they're usually doing a quick threat assessment. They want to know if there is an immediate emergency. By leading with, I am okay, you signal safety. You reassure them that they don't need to call a doctor and they aren't obligated to fix your life in that exact moment.
You're turning off their alarm bells before you introduce your own problem.
Exactly. And then the second half, but I feel stressed, honors your own reality. It prevents the toxic positivity of just pretending everything is great.
It's a boundary.
Yes, you're telling them, I am not in crisis, but my capacity is currently limited. It's highly efficient. In fact, there's a variation of this in the material that strips it down even further for passing interactions. Just two phrases. Too much work. I feel stressed.
Oh, that is ruthless efficiency, and I love it. Too much work. I feel stressed. You don't even bother with the subject and a verb in the first part. It's not. I am currently burdened by too much work. Just too much work. It's punchy. And it proves the underlying thesis here, Fluency and emotional intelligence don't require complex grammar. They require the courage to use the right simple words, unadorned.
And it also expands the toolkit slightly without increasing the difficulty. The material suggests using words like worried or tired interchangeably with stressed.
Oh, interesting. Why is that important?
Well, it is a crucial observation because we often mislabel our internal states. Sometimes we aren't actually experiencing complex psychological stress. We are just profoundly physically or mentally fatigued.
We just need a nap.
Basically. Saying, I feel tired is often a much more accurate and frankly a more socially approachable way to communicate diminished capacity.
That distinction between stress and fatigue is huge. If you tell a colleague, I'm stressed, they might want to talk about it and help you solve the problem. If you say, I'm tired, they're much more likely to just give you space and let you be. So the word choice, while simple, is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting there. But as we look at the next layer of this framework, it becomes clear that what vocabulary you choose might actually be secondary to the physical mechanics of how those words leave your mouth.
Yes, the focus shifts completely from linguistics to physiology here. There is a direct, observable link between the experience of stress and the physical execution of speech.
They're tied together.
Very closely. When your internal alarm system is blaring, it alters your vocal cords, your breathing rate, and your cadence. The notes capture this brilliantly. They describe how, under stress, we tend to speak fast and loud.
Right.
And they provide this visual representation of it by mashing words together.
I have a lot of work and feel very, very bad.
We all know that exact sound. You can practically hear the panic in that compressed string of text.
It's palpable.
I know I've been that person, just firing syllables out like a machine gun, hoping that if I talk fast enough, I can somehow outrun the anxiety.
But of course, the physical act of talking fast just feeds the internal panic.
It makes it worse. Which is why the intervention here is entirely mechanical.
Yeah.
It's not about changing the thought. It's about changing the physical action. The instruction is explicit. Speak slowly. Take a small pause. Breathe. Then speak.
So you force the space.
That's right. Takes that squished, panicked sentence and forcibly inserts space. Have a lot of work.
Pause.
I feel very stressed.
Okay, let's really dig into the biology of why this works. Because to me, this is where a guide on simple language suddenly turns into a neuroscience textbook.
It really does.
Why does forcing a pause and speaking slowly actually make us feel calmer? What is happening on a physiological level when we refuse to speak at the speed of our anxiety?
It comes back to the autonomic nervous system. When you are stressed, your sympathetic nervous system is engaged. That's your fight or flight response.
Okay, so the alarms are ringing.
Right. Your heart is pumping faster to get blood to your muscles, your breathing becomes shallow to take in oxygen quickly, and your vocal cadence speeds up to match that internal high-octane rhythm.
Your body is basically preparing to run from a predator.
Exactly. By consciously choosing to slow down your speech, and crucially, by taking that deliberate breath during the pause, you are initiating a manual override of that biological system.
A manual override. So you aren't waiting for your brain to realize you're safe. You are using your body to tell your brain that you're safe.
Precisely. That deliberate deep breath stimulates the vagus nerve, which is the primary pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system.
The rest and digest mode.
Yes. When the vagus nerve is activated, it sends a chemical signal back to the heart and the brain to lower the heart rate. You are literally hacking your own nervous system.
That is wild.
You're using the mechanical act of paced speech to convince your limbic system that the threat has passed. The pause isn't just for dramatic effect. It is a biological intervention.
And what really fascinates me is how this biological intervention impacts the person listening to you too. If I come at you with that rapid fire, I have a lot of work and you feel very bad, my panicked physiology is going to hijack your physiology.
Yes, that phenomenon is known as emotional contagion.
Emotional contagion.
Humans are highly social primates, and we are wired with mirror neurons that subconsciously detect and replicate the emotional states of those around us.
So we catch the stress like a cold.
Pretty much. If someone speaks to you with the physical markers of panic, fast pace, high pitch, shallow breathing, your mirror neurons detect a threat. Your own amygdala starts to fire, and suddenly you feel anxious too, even if you have no idea what the problem is yet.
Right. So by taking that pause, I have a lot of work. Pause. I feel very stressed. You are doing the listener a massive favor.
A huge favor.
You are preventing your stress from becoming a contagion. You're creating physical acoustic space in the conversation. Instead of triggering their fight or flight response, you give them a second to process the data. You are literally making room for empathy to enter the dynamic.
It transforms the interaction from a collision into a connection.
That's a great way to put it.
The source material emphasizes this dual benefit, noting that speaking slowly helps you, but it also fundamentally helps the listener understand you better. And understanding here isn't about comprehending English vocabulary.
No, it's deeper than that.
It's about being able to process the emotional weight of what you're saying without being crushed by it. The rhythm protects both parties.
And the framework takes this a step further by showing how to use this calm, deliberate rhythm to actually advocate for yourself. It provides templates like, I feel stressed today, I need some rest, or I feel stressed, can I take a break?
So simple.
It calls these phrases clear and polite, and it's striking how powerful it is to just state the emotion, pause, and state the need. There's no groveling, no over-justifying why you deserve a break. It's just unadorned self-advocacy.
Which is incredibly hard for many people to do, because asking for what we need often triggers a fear of rejection.
Oh, definitely.
But by pacing it this way, you remove the emotional charge from the request. You make it a logistical update rather than a desperate plea.
So we've mapped out how to project this outward, how to drop the anchor, calibrate the emotion, and pace the physical delivery. But communication isn't a one-way street.
Right, there's always a listener.
Exactly. And the material makes a really interesting pivot here and shifts the focus entirely onto the listener. How are we supposed to respond when someone else utilizes these tools and tells us they are stressed?
This is where the material reveals a deep understanding of human vulnerability. When someone admits they are stressed, they are handing you something fragile.
They are.
The automatic reflex for a lot of people is to immediately try to fix the problem. We offer solutions, we give advice, or worse, we try to minimize their stress by telling them it's not that bad.
Oh, the worst. Oh, don't worry about the presentation. You'll be fine. It's just a small meeting.
Yes.
We think we're being supportive when we say that, but we're actually just invalidating the reality.
Exactly. The recommended empathetic responses here completely avoid the fixing trap. They focus on pure acknowledgement. Phrases like, I understand, or I am sorry to hear that, or the simple reassurance of, it is okay, you will be fine.
Just witnessing their stress.
Right. They're defined as kind and simple sentences. But there is one specific question the material highlights that represents the absolute gold standard of empathetic response. It simply suggests asking, do you want to talk?
I lingered on that specific question for a long time when I was reviewing the notes. Do you want to talk? It feels so fundamentally different than asking, what's wrong? Or how can I help?
It does.
Why is that exact phrasing so potent when dealing with someone's anxiety?
It comes down to the concept of psychological agency.
Agency.
Yes. When a person is experiencing high levels of stress, what they are fundamentally feeling is a loss of control. The demands of their environment have outstripped their resources, and they feel helpless.
They're overwhelmed.
So if you immediately jump in and demand details or start assigning them solutions, you are inadvertently asserting control over them. You might have good intentions, but you are adding to their sense of powerlessness.
You're managing them rather than supporting them.
Precisely. By asking, do you want to talk? You are immediately handing the steering wheel back to them. You are offering your presence and your support, but you are making it entirely conditional on their consent.
You give them the choice.
Exactly. You empower them to say yes or to say, no, I just need a few minutes of quiet. It demonstrates profound care while fully respecting their autonomy. It's a mechanism that restores their agency in a moment when they feel they have none.
That is such a subtle but incredibly powerful distinction. And this theme of gentle, supportive interaction carries over into a fascinating section about navigating mistakes.
Right, the language learning aspect.
Yeah, because the premise is based on language learning. It addresses the common grammatical error of saying I am stressed instead of I am stressed. It acknowledges that I am stressed is incorrect. But what's compelling is how it instructs the listener to handle that mistake.
The instruction is a masterclass in psychological safety.
How so?
Well, if someone says I'm stressed, the instinct of a rigid listener might be to abruptly correct them.
Oh.
No, the word is stressed.
Which is so embarrassing for the speaker.
It is. But the material advises a much softer approach. It suggests responding with a clarifying question. Oh, you mean you are stressed? It categorizes this as a gentle way to correct that remains polite and helps the person learn without triggering shame.
I really want to strip away the language learning aspect of this, though, because I don't want us to get bogged down in English grammar. The underlying lesson here isn't about verbs and adjectives. It's about the grace of correction.
Yes.
Think about how this applies to emotional communication. When people are overwhelmed, they don't just make grammatical errors, they make emotional errors.
Constant.
They use the wrong tone of voice. They exaggerate. They might say something slightly irrational or lash out over something minor.
They exhibit behavioral mistakes because their prefrontal cortex is offline, exactly as we discussed earlier.
Yes. So when your partner or your colleague snaps at you because they are incredibly stressed, the natural reaction is to get defensive and correct their behavior harshly. Don't talk to me like that. You're being completely unreasonable.
And boom, you're in a fight.
Exactly. But what if we applied the grace of, oh, you mean you're stressed, to those emotional missteps?
That is a phenomenal extrapolation. You are choosing to look past the clunky, imperfect delivery and address the underlying emotional reality.
Giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Instead of attacking the irrational behavior, you offer a gentle clarification. You say, essentially, It seems like you are incredibly overwhelmed right now. Is that what's happening?
You provide an off-ramp.
Yes, a safe off-ramp for their stress, rather than punishing them for failing to communicate perfectly while under pressure. It de-escalates the conflict instantly because it removes the threat of shame.
It requires a lot of emotional maturity from the listener, but it completely changes the dynamic of a relationship. But, as much as this framework focuses on how we interact with others, it actually saves its most profound insight for how we interact with ourselves.
Yes, the self-talk.
The final major component of this material delves into the concept of self-talk, and it is arguably the most important part of the entire deep dive.
It is the internal application of everything we've discussed. The source strongly recommends actively practicing these simple sentences internally. It advises vocalizing positive, structured thoughts to yourself, like, I feel stressed, but I will be okay.
It seems so simple.
It does, but it explicitly highlights that this type of positive sentence physically helps your mind feel calm. It also suggests actionable, self-soothing phrases like, I will take a break. I will rest.
Now, I know some people hear positive self-talk and they immediately roll their eyes.
They think of like toxic positivity.
Yeah, or just standing in front of a mirror giving yourself empty affirmations. But the way it's structured here feels very different. It feels functional. We talked earlier about cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. How does this kind of simple, vocalized self-talk actually interrupt the cycle of anxiety?
To understand why it works, you really have to look at what the brain does when left to its own devices during stress.
Okay, what does it do?
The default mode network of the brain, which is the part that runs when we aren't focused on a specific task, it tends toward rumination. When stressed, our internal monologue becomes a catastrophic feedback loop.
The spiral.
The spiral. We ask ourselves unanswerable questions. Why does this always happen to me? What if I fail this project? What if I get fired? How will I pay my mortgage? It's a rapid-fire sequence of worst-case scenarios.
It's like having a panic attack in the background of your brain while you're just trying to answer emails. It's exhausting.
Exactly. And that internal rumination keeps the amygdala firing, which keeps the cortisol pumping.
So you stay stressed.
Right. By consciously forcing yourself to vocalize a declarative, bounded sentence, I feel stressed, but I will be okay,
Yeah.
you are effectively throwing a wrench into the gears of that catastrophic loop.
You interrupt it.
You're using your executive function to construct a new reality. You acknowledge the presence of the stress, which prevents you from repressing it, but you immediately follow it with a statement of resilience.
You put a boundary around the panic. You don't say, I will never be stressed again, which your brain knows is a lie.
Right, your brain wouldn't believe that.
You say, I'm stressed now, but I will be okay later.
Yes, and the material takes this concept of temporal boundaries even further. It constructs a chronological narrative to show how to process an entire stressful event.
A narrative arc.
Yes, it walks through a scenario. You wake up tired, you see too many messages, you state the baseline, I feel stressed today. You communicate that to a coworker. You take an action, you take a break, drink water, breathe slowly, and then, crucially, it introduces the closing phase.
What's the closing phase?
You say to yourself, I feel a little better now.
That part blew my mind. The idea of intentionally closing the loop. The notes even offer a sentence for how to talk about the stress retrospectively to a friend. I felt very stressed in the morning, but now I feel better.
It's a formal close to the event.
I read that and realized how terrible I am at this. If I have a stressful morning, I will carry that tension in my jaw and my shoulders until 9:00 p.m. I never officially declare to my brain that the thread is over.
Most of us don't. We allow the physiological arousal of stress to linger long after the actual stressor has been resolved. This is why narrative restructuring is so vital.
Because it tells the body it's over.
Exactly. By explicitly stating, I felt very stressed in the morning, but now I feel better, you are categorizing the emotion. You are defining it as a temporary event that occurred in the past, rather than a permanent state of your identity.
It's like closing the background apps on your phone so they stop draining the battery. You are telling your nervous system, we survived the morning emails, you can power down the defenses now.
That's a perfect analogy.
It is such a simple narrative arc, but it requires 20 words or less. I'm stressed today. Too much work. I feel tired. I will take a break. I feel a bit better. You've processed an entire psychological event with absolute minimal linguistic effort.
Because the complexity of the language isn't what resolves the stress. The willingness to face the reality, name it, and move through it is what resolves the stress.
The simplicity is the point.
The simplicity is the feature, not the bug. It prevents the intellect from interfering with the emotional processing.
This brings everything we've explored today into incredibly sharp focus. If we pull all these threads together, The overarching lesson of this deep dive is a total inversion of how we usually operate.
A complete 180.
When the wave of anxiety hits, whether it's the moment you wake up, a crisis at work, or an overwhelming family situation, your instinct will be to scramble for complexity. You will want to explain, justify, and verbalize every nuance of your panic.
And you have to fight that urge.
The discipline we've learned today is to resist that urge completely. Drop the anchor, state the fundamental fact, I am stressed, separate the objective reality from your subjective feeling, physically slow down your cadence and force air into your lungs to hijack your fight or flight response.
And extend grace.
Yes, extend absolute grace both to the people who are trying to support you and to yourself by putting a narrative boundary around the experience.
It challenges the very definition of what it means to be articulate. We equate verbosity with intelligence. We assume that if we can describe our anxiety with $20 words, it means we are in control of it.
But we aren't.
No. This framework suggests the exact opposite. It suggests that relying on massive, convoluted sentences during a crisis is actually a symptom of dysregulation.
You know, the material actually ends with one final exercise that I think completely encapsulates this shift in perspective.
Okay.
After guiding the reader through all these basic declarative sentences, it offers a concluding instruction.
What does it say?
It says to take a deep breath, to smile a little bit, and to say one more time, slowly and clearly, I feel calm. I can speak English.
It's a remarkable closing thought. I feel calm. I can speak English. It forces us to ask a difficult question about our own behavior.
Yeah.
How much of our lives do we spend hiding our vulnerability behind a wall of sophisticated vocabulary? We treat complexity as a shield. But the true mark of mastery, not just over a language, but over our own emotional landscapes, isn't the ability to weave a complicated web of words. True mastery is the quiet confidence required to be perfectly, unashamedly simple.
It takes immense courage to just say what is true without any armor. So tomorrow morning, if you wake up and you feel that familiar heaviness behind your eyes and the sheer weight of the day starts to press down on your chest, don't try to draft a brilliant, complicated thesis about why you feel terrible.
Just let it go.
Don't load up the cognitive burden. Just take a breath, drop the anchor, and give yourself permission to start simple. The complexity of the world isn't going anywhere. But you might be surprised to find that when you strip away the noise, the clarity you need is right there waiting for you.